Happy Jubilee. It's the Queen's 70th year on the throne, and we were out actually today celebrating, had a street party up the road here. I call it a party, it's actually more just a long line of people waiting to eat. Of course, I was one of them. And yeah, it was pretty nice. It was kind of a bit of fun. Lots of people out, more people I've ever seen in my area. And very best wishes to Her Majesty, whom I'm a tremendous supporter of. Today, actually, I'm going to be talking about something maybe a little bit different, but I've touched on it in the past, which is, apps and electronic integration of, electronics into our beloved coffee devices. And I want to talk about it because Tim Hortons, if you're not familiar with who Tim Hortons are, they're a very large publicly traded Canadian coffee chain, and they're global. I think they're here in England now, actually. I'm sure I've seen them in England. But they're big in the US, big in Canada, big in China now as well. Got a big presence going on in China. And they've just been busted by the Canadian Data Protection Office, for the way that they've set up their app. Now, for those of you that don't know, I'm also very much into privacy law and data privacy. I work as a data protection officer, amongst other things, for some large multinationals, advise them on elements of keeping their nose clean and keeping them out of trouble. But in this case, Tim Hortons, I don't know if they had a data protection officer. If he did, he was asleep at the wheel, because they launched an app a few years ago, which did a number of things I'm going to get into in just a minute. I don't want to necessarily get too technical about it, but I want to really relate this back to what my concerns are with companies that are perhaps new to technology, such as the coffee industry really hasn't integrated this kind of technology in the past, doesn't really have what we call the maturity model in place to know how to deal with personal data. And they get very excited about what's possible, the things that they can do, and the decisions get often driven by marketing people rather than by people with your best interests at heart. So what exactly did Tim Hortons do with the app? Well, what they did was track the location of all their customers. So you can imagine, if you're opening up your Tim Hortons coffee app and you're looking for a shop, that's a legitimate request to make. The app should know your location and can perhaps tell you where the nearest cafe was. But what they also did was they tracked you when your app was not running. Not even if your phone is not switched off, but if your phone is on, your app is not running, and it's not in the foreground, and your phone's in sleep mode, it was still tracking your location everywhere you went and sending that information back to Tim Hortons. So you might think, well, that sounds a bit creepy, but what's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen, and as an example of this, was actually only a few weeks ago from Vice magazine in the US, who did a report on data that was collected. Possibly by Tim Hortons, but who knows? But they collected the data from people who were using their mobile phones and their locations, and they were selling that to data brokers, and the data brokers were selling it on for $160. You could, for example, and this is what Vice magazine did, they bought all of the information of the people who were attending abortion clinics. And as you know, or you may or may not know, in America, there's a big movement going on at the moment, a big legal issue around the right to have an abortion or not, regardless of whether you are pro or against that particular law or that particular movement. The fact that they were tracking people's attendance should go against everyone's principles. We have the right to privacy, and what people were effectively able to do was take that information of who had attended and sell it on to people who may want to pursue a prosecution of those individuals, as an example. So how does this relate back to coffee machines again? Imagine So it's not so much worried about my Starbucks app, although you should be. I think we have to, all of these apps should be verified as to what they are doing with our data. And we should all have a right. In the UK, we should be protected under the UK GDPR law. In Europe, it is a GDPR. The UK is slightly different because we've had Brexit and we've basically got our own derogations and interpretations of it. But now imagine that you're getting yourself an espresso machine or a grinder with, as they're starting to come in now, Wi-Fi connectivity. And as you start to get more features and more functionality on those machines, that those machines themselves can be passing information back to the manufacturer. And the information that you'd expect them to pass back would be very benign. You'd expect them to pass back status of the machine, how often it's being used, whether or not it's functioning correctly, and useful information like that. But what happens if that information is then used in a different way? I'll give you an example. A very real example, a real problem as an example, is in the heavy machine business, where if you've got a combine harvester from John Deere, for example, in the United States, and you have a problem with that combine harvester, there is nobody that you can call other than John Deere. There is simply absolutely nothing that you can do. An electronic light will flash up and it'll say, you can no longer use this machine. There's a problem. The problem is error code 12874E. You have no idea what that means. You don't have the book. John Deere will tell you they have to send an engineer around. And this is a true story. Took 2 days to send an engineer, to get engineers to fly over there. You have to pay the flights, you have to pay the engineer's time. He comes in, he goes, yeah, your battery's flat. Your battery is flat. So this guy had 2 days of downtime, this farmer. He had paid for somebody to fly across the country to tell him that his battery was flat. There was no way for him to and John Deere will not allow them access to error codes or allow them to tamper or fiddle or change any parts or do any maintenance on those machines themselves. It's called a right to repair movement in America that's been discussed. And I worry that the entire industry of coffee enthusiasts, the guy that repairs my machine, first of all, I worry that that industry is going to go, much in the same way that Apple has destroyed the self-repair of Apple phones. That's a longer story, but you can't repair an Apple phone anymore. Technically now, in the last month or so, you can, but in practice, you can't. So, the right to repair. I want to be able to call Adrian to come repair my coffee machine. I don't want these electronics being configured in such a way that I get some obscure error code that tells me, I have to have a Rocket accredited engineer come around who then just says, yeah, you just need to run a bit of descaler through it. I don't want to have that. Secondly, I don't want my personal data going back to Rocket. The kind of personal data I don't want to share with him is when I'm in my house. I don't want him to know when I'm making my coffee. I don't want them to know when I'm not in my house. I see that as a security risk. So if that information is not kept secure and people have the ability to hack that information is lost, or that their information systems are insecure and they're breached, it's a fairly reasonable assumption that if somebody's gone and spent £8,000 or £10,000 on espresso equipment, that they've got other nice things. And if they're not at home, well, that's a wonderful time to go and break in. And if you think this is a bit sort of out there, bit fringe, this is exactly what people did on Facebook a number of years back. And when people were posting on Facebook that they're going on holiday, etc., criminals used to use that to look to see about their lifestyles and whether their home was worth burgling or not. So there's a number of different ways. And of course, can't think of all the different ways that people can misuse the information. But the criminals are very creative. And not just the criminals, the companies themselves, of course, can sell on that information. If I make a lot of coffee, you know, they can sell that information, or not sell that information, they can reuse that information for their own marketing purposes, to contact me, which I may or may not want them to do, but a lot of companies don't respect your marketing decisions. If it's hooked in with your mobile phone, you may well start getting messages from the company, which again, what they'll often do is tie together purposes. So they'll tie together an app that you're using to give you notifications about your espresso machine will now give you marketing messages as well. And this is really annoying. This is something that really bugs me. I have this problem on my television. I've got an LG television, it's relatively new. And in order to use it, I have to accept certain terms and conditions. As part of those terms and conditions they've bundled is I get adverts popping up in the top right hand of my screen telling me I can get a special deal on Apple TV and etc. etc. That just comes on top, overlays on top of my television screen, which I don't want to see. And I don't want to see those kind of messages coming up on my coffee app because I've got my coffee maintenance set and they got information about me. And the whole thing just makes me feel uncomfortable is probably the wrong word, just a little bit tired. I'm a little bit tired of this information overload and this need or this feeling of companies that they have to collect all this information about us to know us so that they can serve us better. I don't want to be known by my coffee equipment provider. I don't want to be known by them. I don't want them to know anything about me. If I want to know something about me, I'll call them and tell them. It's very simple. It's worked like that for a very long time. But the marketing departments are just obsessed now by people trying to connect everything to Wi-Fi. They don't really know what they're doing. They've not done it before. They've got no maturity model in place. They've got no security. They don't understand the data privacy laws. They do whatever they like. And this isn't a problem yet in the coffee world. I kind of just start seeing it. I think this Tim Hortons example probably was the tipping point for me to start to talk about this, because this is my fear and I want to talk about it before it becomes a problem. I don't want to wait until it is a problem and then say it should stop. I think we should absolutely make it clear by not buying equipment that is Wi-Fi connected. It's as simple as that. Unless the Wi-Fi connectivity offers some very specific advantage, and it does, for example, in the commercial environment. In the commercial environment, you can connect your machines together. You can do maintenance set schedules, all sorts of things, help synchronize, understand where you've got a bad batch of beans, synchronize recipes and those sorts of things. Makes an awful lot of sense if you're running a coffee chain. But if you're Nick in his house with his coffee machine, they don't need to know that information. There's no reason that I can actually think of, and do tell me if you disagree. I'd be very interested to hear any use cases where you can tell me why you would want to have your system talking back to the manufacturer and sending information about you, about your habits, about your coffee drinking, about your usage back to the manufacturer. And for those that say, well, but Nick, they're just going to send diagnostics information back. Well, in that case, I would say, one, remember the John Deere situation. So there have to be a right to repair and not a quasi right to repair as in the way Apple's done it, which is you have to rent this equipment from us because it's so complicated to open up, and we'll send it to you for 1 week, but you won't get the parts for 1 week and 1 day. And then you've got to, it's in a way, you don't want to have that situation, and you don't want to have error codes that you don't understand that you've got to call out engineers for. If they want to have a very open system where you send diagnostics back, that's great, but that diagnostic communication should be controlled by us. So we should push a button and send the diagnostics. It should not be an ongoing daily communication, because that just is too tempting. It's just too tempting for these companies. They can't wait to get their hands on your data and to start to understand you better. Now, if you're the type of person that really wants to be understood and you want to share all the information, feel like you're going to get special deals from them, well, knock yourself out. But I think the majority of us now have lived in this dystopian world where we've seen all the hacks and we've seen all of the crazy situations about how our data is being used and misused. And I could name a dozen companies like that right now, where companies that probably you're using a lot of their products. I don't want to because I want to get sued, but there are companies out there which do not tell you what they do with their data, and you'd be horrified if you actually read about it and knew what you were looking at. So let's keep our coffee industry clean. Let's keep our machines dumb. Let's keep them doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is making great coffee, and let's keep our data to ourselves.